I am Piero Lumumba here at the Manzoni Wildlife Estate in Machakos County in the Republic of Kenya in the mother continent of Africa as we continue discussions on Africa's yesterday, today and tomorrow. And today we focus on an iconic figure who lived between the year 1787 and 1828, Shaka Kasenzanga Kona, the son of King Kasenzanga Kona and Nandi. Of course, his paternity was debated in the early days. But in order to understand what he led and what to the world is known as the Zulu Empire, almost a similitude of the Roman Empire in the assessment of historians, we ought to go back to the beginning of two iconic kings. This is the Nguni peoples, but there are two kings that are normally forgotten as we talk about the rise of Chaka. This is King Zwide of the Ndwandwe and Dingishuayo of the Mtetwa. These were the kings that were reigning in the early days of the formation of what was to become the Zulu Empire. And it is in the confusion of the conflict between Zwide of the Ndwandwe and Dingishuayo of the Mtetwa that Shaka then emerges. And when Shaka emerges, he emerges as a young warrior who is fearless, who really has something to prove because acceptance by his half-brothers is also very limited. So he has everything to prove. During this period, the Zulus, which was a small clan really in the entire arrangement, begin to rise. And what does Shaka do that is unique when he becomes the lead warrior? He does something that had never been done. He says and begins to say that if you want to be in the army of the Amazulu or the Zulu, you must be an individual who is disciplined. You must live in barracks. So for the first time amongst the Nguni peoples, the combatants are regimented. And when they are regimented, it means that discipline can be instilled. And in those regiments, they are educated in the art of warfare. And we know, for example, that the cow horn system was one of the methods that was used to train them to fight from the flanks. And he discovers that many times, many warriors actually become exposed when they use the spear, and once they have thrown it, then they are disarmed. And that is how he comes with the Ikilua, which sometimes is referred to as their segai for purposes of man-to-man combat. And that revolutionizes the entire field in the struggles that then begin to take place. And he begins to be a conqueror. He's an unsettled spirit who wants to conquer territory. And the major campaign that he engages in is what is called the Mfekane, which is really sweeping and cleaning. And Mfekane is mounted, and many clans in the Nguni region begin to give way to Shaka's kingdom. And that is happening at a time when the settlers, the colonialists, have not come into the land, and therefore the conqueror in this regard is Shaka of the Amazulu. And of course, when you are doing this, there is resistance, and other people now begin to run away as he engages in what is essentially a scorched earth method. And wherever he goes, he has succeeded in centralizing command. And I think in terms of governance, why he is normally compared to the Roman Empire is that he is creating and capturing territory. And when territory has been captured, then allegiance is then paid to the conqueror in terms of tributes. And whoever is installed as a chief then becomes beholden to this warrior king. In this regard, therefore, a number of things happen which make the Zulu Empire, even as it is expanding, very effective. Command is centralized. Administration is centralized. The soldiers are well fed. The population is subdued. Administration systems are imposed. And as he moves and as he kills and conquers, he is driving people away. And that is why the clans begin to move and actually begin to form what can be described as tribes. So that when you talk about the Ndebele, who are now to be found in modern day Zimbabwe, these are part of the people who suffered during the Mfectane. And there are many other communities which are then driven in what is today, latter-day KwaZulu-Natal. And Shaka continues with his escapades, and he is a restless spirit. In fact, sometimes when they say that he's only reminiscent of the Roman Empire, there is some way in which he is a similitude of Alexander the Great. That he is moving and he does not want to settle. He wants to conquer. He is moving. And remember that he is moving in an environment where there is no mechanization. And some of the things that must be done as he moves along is also to ensure that provisions are made. How do you ensure that your soldiers are fed? These are things that are being taken into account. How do you ensure that there is no rebellion and mutiny? So there is also a dictatorial, imperial system that is created, and these imperial systems must be kept in hold. And this tells you, therefore, that the empire is very unstable, because there is betrayal very often, and there is rebellion. So many executions also take place. And one of the things that I think Shaka has also learned is this, that if you want to immunize yourself from internal rebellion, then you must keep your army in a constant stage of war. And this is something that he discovered, and I think he may not have read what was happening in the Roman Empire, but I think within the African environment, he must have seen that whenever you become stable as a conqueror, then you invite rebellion. So the Mfecane is meant to keep the tree, or rather to keep the tree rolling, as it were, being rolled from the top down, to ensure that there is always instability. Shaka remains in this place, but things begin to unravel. They begin to unravel because there are those who think that Shaka is too dictatorial. There are those who think that this permanent state of war is not a good thing. There are those who think that Mfecane is essentially indiscriminate killing, and that it is destabilizing the community and preventing the community or the society, the kingdom, from realizing our potential. And what begins to happen is rebellion within his ranks. And this rebellion does not come from far, but it comes from within. It begins in terms of mutinies. It begins in terms of resistance from outside. And remember that Mfecane has also made it possible for him to be spread too thin. The emperor is growing bigger and bigger, and control from the center is becoming more and more difficult. And in that way, the control that he had over these territories that he's conquering is becoming weaker and weaker. This provision to these warriors is becoming more and more difficult. And when he comes home, there is already a conspiracy to eliminate him in the year 1828. In the year 1828, his two brothers, Dingane and Mlangana, assassinate him. And once that has happened, the Zulu Empire, which had been created by Shaka, begins to unravel. Another thing that is also happening at that time is that the colonialists have started coming into the land. The British have started coming into the land in the year 1879, when the battles of the Blood River are being fought, the battle of the ravaging of Ulundi, and the empire that was created by Shaka then disappears in the same way that the Roman Empire disappeared. Now, why is it said that this was a similitude of the Roman Empire in Africa? The philosophy was one and the same. And there are certain things that you can see that were very similar. That number one, the Shaka army was born out of organization. Number two, that beyond the organization, it was also born out of innovation in warfare. And that innovation, the creation of the cow horn and the creation of the assegai or ikilua, these were innovations that gave the people an edge that others over the others who were resisting. Number three, that he realized very early that it was important to barrack your army. And many times, many of the individuals who are involved in combat were discouraged from getting into marital unions. And once he did this, he also realized that in order to have effective control, the control had to be centralized. And the other thing he realized, that you must keep your army or your fighting group in a constant and permanent stage of fighting, so that the fighting spirit is alive and well. And the similitude is that, like the Roman Empire, it started bursting from the center. And it is that center, once it breaks, that helped to destroy the empire in the very same manner that the empire of the Roman Empire was destroyed. And it comes from internal betrayal. The people whom you thought were the ones who are going to protect you are the very same that destroy you. So that we can even say that Shaka may have said, like Julius Caesar before Augustus, "E tu brute." He could have said, "E tu dingane, e tu mlangani," because these are your brothers with whom you eat and drink, and they are the ones who are killing you, and you are saying, "Even you dingane, even you mlangana, you are killing me." And that was the end of the Roman Empire, in a similar manner, and the Zulu Empire in a similar manner. And ultimately, from that point on, what we see is the decline of the Zulu Empire, leading up much later in 1879 to the burning of Ulundi and the exile of Sesuayo, and that marked the end of the Empire Shaka of the Amazulu. Thank you very much, brothers and sisters. These stories about Africa never end, because the continent is rich with stories, new and old. Today we are focused on Shaka the Zulu. We will see you again as we continue these conversations.
The world is changing, and so is Africa's reality. Political shifts, new partnerships, and economic opportunities. And we're here to uncover why and how it's done. What do the billion-dollar IMF loans have to do with the Kenyan unrest? Are US and French troops actually withdrawing from African states after years of presence? Is Europe's so-called green agenda so green and helpful after all? Why are more and more African countries increasing trade with Russia? And how is Britain lending Africa the treasures London looted? Now, from colonial legacies and security to the future of African democracies, we break down the key challenges ahead and analyze the solutions. While the world is watching Africa, tune in with us and question more with RT International on Maisha TV Kenya.
Problem number one is leadership in Africa.
What can we do for Africa? That was a wrong question. The right question was, what can we do with Africa?
What Africa do we want?
Africa had to seek first the political kingdom, and the rest would be given unto them. Unfortunately, we sought and obtained the political kingdom, but there is still a debate as to whether the rest has been given unto us.
Half of our people here are below 20 years old. Yes? Look at the average age of our presidents. Is about 63, 64 years old. We're the only continent in the world where we have presidents at 90 years old starting new terms. I mean, you guys are crazy or what?
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Mushabi Jr. on your screen, bringing to you a program called Maisha Talk. This is where we build your capacity to achieve your dreams and visions. One thing I've learned in life is nobody can ever tell you that you can never be anything or achieve anything in this world. Shut them down. You can achieve anything in this world. And in this program, that is what we are talking about. Principles, attitudes, belief systems, where you are going to gain a lot. You're better off than anybody who's not going to watch this program. This is going to change your life. It's big, it's fun, it's educating, it's entertaining. Right here on Maisha Television, where you choose it, you watch it, and you definitely love it.
This keeps me going. On those days when I feel like giving up. Fire.
Do not want the money or properties achieved in a corrupt way.
Badala ya kusaidia watoto wadogo wadogo katika academy za sport, wewe kazi yako imekuwa kila weekend unakuja kwa matanga kutukana viongozi. Wewe ni waziri wa michezo ama waziri wa matanga na masuala za ndani.
Sasa wewe unatuambia nini? This government is going to punish you more than they will punish me.
Tuko na mheshimiwa Eugene, tuko na mheshimiwa Lusaka, na mheshimiwa Wetangula.
I have no problem. I have full confidence in the agencies that we have to do their job. People are out there bandying my brother yesterday. Me, I've said, if he's guilty, aendelee.
Lakini hata nyinyi mkuwe na mshike rada. Sasa nyinyi wakati ya kufanya kazi mnasema tafuta Ruto, lakini siku ya kupiga kura mnaniambia tipping. Sasa nyinyi kweli mko na plani?
We invite you to like Maisha TV Kenya on all our online media platforms. Facebook at Maisha TV Kenya, Twitter at Maisha TV Kenya, Instagram at Maisha TV Kenya. Maisha TV now invites you to send your feedback or complain because we listen to you. You can now reach us on all our media platforms on Maisha TV. Just send your messages to our social media platforms Call or text us on 0746 999 841 or send us an email to info@maishatv.co.ke. We care. We shall respond to your feedback or complaints within 14 days. Also, keep a copy of messages sent to us. We listen to you because you listen and you watch us. Maisha TV. Choose it, watch it, and love it.
I am Pierre Lumumba, and I'm here at the Manzoni Wildlife Estate here in Machakos County in the Republic of Kenya and in the continent of Africa. And today we focus on an important subject which started way back in 1857. This is sometimes referred to by its French name, Le Travail du Sénégalais, or Tiaroy. This is important because it was informed by a very interesting thing by a French military expeditionist who was coming from the premise that you needed to recruit individuals who would fight for the French. And the whole idea was informed by the assumption, it's an anthropological assumption that was made in not only in France, but in different parts of Europe, where it was argued that there are people who, by dint of how they were suited for combat. And the focus, of course, we say travailleurs Senegalese, but the people who are actually recruited into this particular force were not necessarily from what is modern-day Senegal. Remember, we are talking about a territory whose name has changed over the years, so that if you are speaking in the contemporary terms, the people who were recruited from what is now Senegal, what is now Guinea, what is now Mali, what is now Chad, and what is now La Côte d'Ivoire. And there were different methods of recruitment in those early days. It was recruitment by conscription, it was recruitment by enticement, and in certain cases, even force was used for purposes of recruitment. And the reason why it was necessary to recruit in this manner is because France, like most European states, were involved in war, and you needed personnel who could be used in war. Of course, some of these individuals were fighting in territories that were hostile, but initially they were used in the wars of conquest, so that once they had been recruited, they would be deployed within their territory for purposes of conquest and for purposes of French control in the African territory. But when the World War started, these were the forces that were used by the French in the World War. And it is instructive that when they were taken to the war, they were taken to some of the most dangerous, most difficult areas for purposes of being used, to use a modern terminology, they were used as cannon fodder. And in that way, many of them succumbed. Remember that these are individuals from tropical Africa who had never seen snow, some of them. So the weather was a major factor in affecting their performance. In addition to that, there were diseases from which they were suffering. And this continued during the entire period when they were fighting. It is actually estimated that as many as 200,000 were recruited to serve in this manner. and they became part of the French riflemen, and they were incorporated. But unfortunately, the discrimination continued even when they served in the French army. Ultimately, of course, what happened is that they continued to serve the French even after the World War. And during the Second World War, the same group were actually used to good effect. And stories are now told and properly recorded that many of them who were captured by the Nazi administration of Adolf Hitler were subjected to discrimination. They were abused. Some of them were executed. And at the end of the World War, when the war was lost by the Germans and the fascists, they were demobilized. And it is in their demobilization that they were then kept at Camp Theory, which became the center of the killings that happened in the year 1944. And what happened in 1944 is that they were making claims, number one, that having been demobilized, we are entitled to be paid, we are entitled to be given what is given to other soldiers, we are entitled to all the benefits. And of course, this did not happen, with the consequence that the punishment and the deaths occurred there, occasioned by the French. And this became one of the things actually that gave impetus to the struggle for independence, because you had organized African peoples who had had the honor and privilege, if you may, of seeing how the French were performing in the war field, and who were organized and therefore had a totally different source of belief in terms of treating the French, who otherwise manifested themselves and depicted themselves as superior. So what happened at Camp Theory, and there is a beautiful film that has been made in the year 1988 by Sembene Osman. Sembene Osman, this great Senegalese filmmaker, has made a beautiful film that talks about what happened at Camp Theory in the year 1944, and tells us in that film, which I commend to everybody, he says that these were some of the things that ultimately led to the impetus that then was acquired by the struggle for decolonization, because there were people who were organized and came with a totally different philosophy of life. Which begs the question, therefore, what are the lessons that we ought to learn from initiatives such as Travailler Senegalese, and what happened at Camp Theory, and what happened in the area of compensation? And there are a number of things that deserve to be analyzed in order to situate this particular initiative in its proper historical context. Number one, that the entire colonial project had no limits. That the entire colonial project also entailed the use of African peoples for martial reasons. And that the abuse of African peoples in terms of their compensation, even when they were fighting for the colonizing powers, persisted. And this is why they were not paid as well as they should have been. This is why they were subjected to discrimination. This is why even in times of war they were exposed to the most dangerous situations, and this is why they were abused and used in a difficult environment. The second thing that emerges from this is that this was a modus operandi that was known throughout Europe, because it was happening in the French territory, and it was also happening elsewhere in other territories controlled by the European powers. And this was forced conscription. Forced conscription meant that you went into villages and simply took young men without their consent and barracked them out and made them to be spirited and transported to different parts of Europe, and then they would be taken into the war environment, and some of them were never to be found. Some of them have never been found. The third thing that emerges from that scenario is that the colonial period was also a period when people's labor was taken for granted. And what happened at Camp Thiaroye is a perfect example of how this abuse was undertaken. The fourth thing is that even in a war situation, you are not only abused by those on whose behalf you are fighting, but you are also abused by the others who captured you. And this was very manifest between 1941 and 1944, when the Senegalese, and I use the word Senegalese to include others who are incorporated from different countries, were abused by the Nazis. And it is now historically recorded that even when prisoner exchanges were taking place, the French were never keen on having these dark-skinned people as being part of their prisoners of war. And this in itself is indicative of the discrimination that persisted in the area. And number 5, we must also remember, therefore, that when they were making the claim that they ought to be compensated, it was out of this experience that really they had made a contribution. And it is not lost on me that, in fact, it is a contemporary issue. After Sembene Osman's film in 1988, there have now been claims and emerging claims that all those who served in the French army, particularly from Senegal, the Senegalese are the more organized, ought to be compensated. And that when one is talking about reparations, these are some of the things that should be factored in the compensation. Ultimately, it is to be remembered, and this is historically now recognized, that when history is written, it is now said, among other things, that these men who sacrificed for France ought to be recognized. And if one listened to some of the early speeches, particularly of Leopold Sédar Senghor, the first president of Senegal, he was very eloquent in talking about the contribution that the people who suffered at Camp Thiaroye made to the struggle for decolonization. And indeed, when in 1960s, Leopold Sédar Senghor was talking about the negritude movement, the reclaiming of people's dignity, it is some of the experiences that were manifested during that period that informed his negritude movement. It is a sad thing in the history of what we now call Senegal, and of course the surrounding countries, whose sons particularly were taken away, used and abused by the French, used and abused by the Germans, and neglected not to be compensated as they should have been compensated. These are the issues that should be brought to the fore, particularly now that the issues of reparation and the issues of decolonization and the fight against neocolonization, we should always remind the imperial powers that they visited unforgettable pain on the peoples of the continent of Africa. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We continue with our interrogation of painful experiences in the continent of Africa. Travailler Senegalese is one of them, but we will come back again. Thank you very much.